Good afternoon. I'm honored to be here and share with you this afternoon. I want to start out by sharing a little story with you that happened to me, several months ago. And I think many of you are probably familiar with this. You make it home, and you go down into, say, for us, it was our basement. When we went down in the basement, I went down there, and as I took the last step off the last stair, I stepped into water. I know, it's how I felt too. I step into water, and as I investigate more and I go in and look in our utility area, the heater had over everything, overheated, overdone, over everything. And its over was also a whole bunch of water sitting on our floor. Now, what's interesting about this issue is that as I saw that and as I told my wife and said to her, we have an issue, we have a crisis, we have a problem, what do you and I do when that happens? If you're like me, like we did that night, we start in on getting it fixed, don't we? Because Lord knows, I cannot live in a house with a 16-year-old daughter and everything that comes with having a 16-year-old daughter and a beautiful wife and not have heat in the house, or for that matter, hot water. And so whenever problems come, what do? We fix it, don't we? Let me share some numbers with you today. And what you're going to see is not just how we look in terms of the state of Michigan, but you will also see some national numbers here as well. So we'll start out by talking about college attainment. So the data that you see here, as far as what we know we need in the state of Michigan in terms of university grads as well and also associate degree grads, certificates, here's what the numbers look like. Now, I deeply believe in not reading to you, and so I am big on letting you see what these data say, but I'll kind of highlight a few things as we go along this journey today. But what you find there is that we know in our state that we are looking at just by next year, hard to believe next year, 2020, that's coming pretty quick, that we already know what that picture looks like in terms of how many graduates we need, how many folks coming out of post-secondary with some kind of credential, whether it be a certificate or a bachelor's or a university, whether it be a bachelor's or a master's or a doctorate, we know what those numbers look like. But also suffice it to say that what we know is also true is that our numbers, as far as senior class and those who are graduating, we continue to see decline in those numbers. Well, no wonder our governor just a few months ago in a State of the State address actually challenged us as a state to be another state in our country that has a higher ed or a post-secondary attainment goal. The governor said it at 60%. Why? Because of these type of data that tell us that in our state, we're going to need that educated populace in order to get things done the way we know that our future needs. Now you move on to what we know as our career technical education. And if you live in the same kind of area that I have for years at this point, even before I moved to Michigan, what you and I know is that a lot of those CTE programs have been basically taken away and taken out of the high schools and have pretty much either gone to an ISD or, in the case of what we have in Grand Rapids, not just the ISD, but also the community college. So what we do is that when you see some of these declining numbers in terms of what we know we need for CTE and skilled trades and those training, what happens is that in our state right now is that in many cases, a lot of those students come to us at the community college. Yet and still, we know that at the high school level, those are things that we can be focused on. So let's go and talk about what we know we need in terms of the PISA. The PISA, that is the Program for International Student Assessment. Now, this is looking at the national level. I told you I'd have some national data for you. What that test does, it's every 3 years they issue this PISA test. And as you see, that is in math, reading, and science. Now, as a country, you will be able to readily recognize from 2000 to 2015, over that 15-year span, we have fallen. And that particular study is done, and there's some 90 countries that have participated in the PISA. Now, while those numbers are at that upper end of 90, that's still not, A, where we want to be, and B, we certainly don't want to see that number continue to drop from a national perspective. Then as we go on, we start looking at some of the NAEP scores. And you and I know and have heard with NAEP, that's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's a test and an assessment that's taken nationally. Every state basically participates with NAEP. And so what it does for us, it allows us to be able to compare NAEP scores state to state. Whether you like, dislike, agree, disagree, it is that national state-to-state look that we can always know that each state is relying upon. And so what you see, and these are Michigan numbers, and I'll let you read across, that when we find ourselves in the most recent that you see appearing in 2017, well, you see where those numbers are. Again, when you go home and there's water on the floor, what do? Now let's talk about what's happening in terms of all of our students, because what also comes to the conversation is that maybe this is just one of those issues that is only occurs in our urban core or in our rural areas. Well, the data shows us that while that is true, that it does happen, and we do know that it takes a certain amount of funding to make sure that we are able to service those students at a good level. But what this shows us is that it's not just an urban-rural issue we have. This also gets to some of our higher income areas as well. I was in a meeting just a few days ago that brought this point out in terms of some of our more affluent districts that are needing to also look at and consider what those data look like, and we have to be aware of. The final slide I want to show you is this one, our Michigan per pupil spending. Now, what this one shows, it shows a comparison there with Florida, states like Florida, Massachusetts, but I have specifically up there Florida. And what this is talking about is we spend a lower percentage of our money on instruction. This is talking instruction. And this is holistic. We're talking about across the state. We see that on the instructional side, that we have that lower number in terms of comparison of those states that we say are doing pretty well in terms of how they educate. And it just brings to question. But what it also brings to question is this. By the time we get to this point, the question becomes, with what I just showed you, what do you do about that? Because some people, as I've gone through and people know that I was going to talk about this, I've had different people tell me, hey, you need to really talk, Bill, about the issue of finance and funding. And I've had others that said, you really need to talk about testing because that's an issue. Bill, teacher preparation, boy, that one's... What I come back with as I listen to all those people is that yes, 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 and yes, but this is more of a Michigan problem than an individual problem. Because if you and I get to blaming one thing and starting to point to one thing, what does that do? If I can point at your thing, that gets it off me. I think it's all of our problem. And I think everyone in this room has a part in it. If you think that you leave an island having talked about education in this manner, and you can leave the island and all of a sudden it's going to be different and better, you're wrong. Just because we sit and talk about it does not mean that that's going to change it just because the Mackinaw Policy Conference talked about it. What are you going to do when you get home? How do you, CEO of a business, what do you do about this? Yeah, it's on you. Educators, what should we be doing about it? I point to myself. What do I need to be doing about it? It is partnership with and collaborative work with not only the school districts, but with each other. We have examples that we see in West Michigan. We now have more examples we see in Detroit of the exact thing I'm talking about. Because if we aren't thinking collaboratively about how we are going to solve this problem, not how you are going to solve this problem, we won't get anywhere. Because when we have a problem, you got to go about fixing it. Let me leave you with this because my time is short. This was 2003, and it was in Portland, Oregon. I want to leave you with this story. And the story is about a man named Maurice Cheeks. He was the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. The Portland Trail Blazers were getting ready to play the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Western Conference Championship. The Trail Blazers were down 2-0. And Maurice Cheeks, being the head coach, now this game is the first game back in Portland. He had a lot of pressure on him. He knew that we have to win this game. Because if we don't win this game, we're going to be down 3-0. It's going to be hard to come back. Maurice Cheeks, or as a lot of us like to call him, Mo Cheeks, he had a whole lot of pressure on him this particular night. And then before the game, he met a young lady named Natalie Gilbert. Watch this video.
And I'll To honor America and salute the men and women serving our country with our national anthem, please welcome, as voted by you, the fans, our winner of the Toyota Get the Feeling of a Star promotion, Natalie Gilbert.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the stars like stars? Stars like last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare and the singing air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Well, the first thing you know is that you should never ask Maurice Cheeks to sing the national anthem. But I want to leave you with this thought on what you just saw. It didn't matter what color her skin was. It didn't matter that she was a 13-year-old girl who actually had spent 10 days sick with the flu before trying this. It didn't matter who she voted for in the last election. Didn't matter what party she was for. Didn't matter what she thought was the real reason for this or that political stance. None of that mattered. What mattered is that Natalie Gilbert needed help in that moment. And while Maurice Cheeks had all this pressure upon him, none of that stuff mattered. What mattered is that he saw a problem and he knew he needed to help fix it. Friends, that's Michigan. That's us. We have issues. We have problems. I can tell you from knowing many of our superintendents across our state, they're right here with us. They get it. But when you have a problem, when you have an issue, you got to fix it. But you fix it together. So what do you do about it? God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.